Walt, it was a big week in autonomy. Waymo and Tesla had big announcements sending Uber and Lyft stocks tumbling down. Kodiak made history. First time ever anybody has ever sold an autonomous truck. But first, our sympathies go out to the unfortunate incident that happened at Reagan last night with American Airlines Flight 587 involving the Black Hawk. It's a very, very sad time in our nation's history today.
Just kind of underscores the safety issues that can occur in anywhere in transportation. And, I think what kind of hit home to us is, last week we were talking about, Sean Duffy being put in or being, nominated and confirmed as Secretary of Transportation. He was sworn in last night as this was happening. So hitting the ground running for Duffy. I saw him in a press conference this morning, my real first exposure. I'm sure you might have had more exposure to him in the past. I thought he did a phenomenal job in terms of how he was interacting with the press and dealing with the situation, had a command of the situation. So clearly the right pick to have in that job. I guess the question, though, Grayson, is, we were expecting him to kind of hit the ground running in autonomy. This obviously is going to, have a massive impact to his workload. What are your thoughts on kind of what the plan is or how he goes from here?
First and foremost, courage under fire. Congressman Duffy, now Secretary Duffy, is clearly showing that he is beyond qualified for this role. Having watched it unfold last night, actually speaking to an individual who saw it happen live last night, the response that I've been seeing last night on TV and the response that I've been seeing today, it's a well-coordinated response. It's just unfortunate, the situation, but Secretary Duffy's leadership is clearly shining here. As it relates to autonomy, yes, it is unfortunately going to take a backseat at the moment while they investigate this, and hopefully out of the investigation, this never happens again.
So the other kind of thing from last week, Grayson, that you talked about, this appointment of the general counsel. Obviously, he was just sworn in, but it's been a week. Any word on the progress of getting a GC in place for the DOT? And if not, what's your sense on timing on that, especially given the secretary's having to deal with this recent tragedy?
No new movement from what we've been hearing in our DC circles on a general counsel. I do want to highlight that Secretary Duffy has an incredible right-hand man and Deputy Secretary Bradbury. So he has a really good supporting cast around him, and hopefully a general counsel is appointed in due time. But as of today, Secretary Duffy has a very strong team around him, and I'm fully confident in their ability to handle this unfortunate tragedy.
There was also, I think, just while we're kind of in this world of DC, the Washington Post, not something I subscribe to, but they had a surprising editorial board or op-ed come out this week. I think the title was, "If Self-Driving Cars Are Safer Than the Alternative, What's to Lose?" What are your thoughts on, first of all, have you read the article and thoughts on it?
I read the article. I'm shocked. Having experienced firsthand the wrath of a certain reporter at the Washington Post harassing my wife, a matter of fact.
Wow.
It was calling my wife on her cell phone multiple times a day saying, "I need to speak to your husband," trying to get a quote out of me going against Mr. Musk, which I refused to comment. I was shocked to see this. I was pleasantly surprised. I kept saying, I'm in my office. Oh, wow, oh, wow. My wife's like, is everything okay? I said, you're never going to believe it. The Washington Post wrote a positive story about autonomy. The story, to sum it up for our listeners and viewers, the narrative was the editorial board for the Washington Post was advocating for a national autonomous vehicle framework. They based their advocacy off of the data that Waymo put out with Swiss Re around the safety cases. And very strategically important, the editorial board highlighted distracted driving and how it is a massive epidemic. And to put this into context, and they did a beautiful job writing this. Last year, the individuals that perished on the roads of the United States would fill up the Washington National Stadium. Globally, 2 million people perished. A lot of those crashes and accidents could have not happened with an autonomous vehicle. And they urged Congress to take action and to pass the National Autonomous Vehicle Framework to make our roads safer. To the Washington Post editorial board, thank you for saying the truth. Thank you for writing that op-ed.
I mean, I think that's good. And I think Tesla has given some information about people that use FSD versus not, and some of the accidents that occur, number of miles traveled before the number of accidents. We've talked to insurance companies that have looked at this data as well. Swiss Re that you referenced. There's plenty of data, and it's I guess finally refreshing to have someone highlight this, and because it's going to be an important part of moving everyone forward toward a national framework and just getting the adoption. I think later on we're going to talk about Elon and his attempt to go national, and he said the biggest hurdle is not technically, it's going to be the regulatory mindset. So I think having articles like this are helpful, and it's something in the 22 episodes that we've been doing this now, we've talked about and have encouraged the companies, and hopefully the companies played a role in this, try and engage more with media, guys like ourselves, to try and get the message out there, the data out there that supports, pushing this forward.
Do you feel to some degree, and going back to the inauguration, we saw Mr. Bezos was there behind the president and inauguration. He is obviously the very public owner of the Washington Post. Do you feel this is a way of Mr. Bezos trying to influence policy, as Zoox is very publicly trying to ramp up in Las Vegas?
Who knows? Because we saw how some op-eds were dropped, in for different publications, for who they recommended for president or not. So who knows? I don't think it's productive to even try and speculate on that. So the bottom line is, if we move towards a national framework, and I've said this before when we talked about Elon, I think what Elon's influence has on the administration is going to be good for autonomy overall, not just for Tesla. And I think the same would be the case if Bezos had any impact in trying to get press out on the benefit autonomy, because it's not lies, right? It is the truth.
It is the truth, and I do want to highlight, putting on my policy hat here, which is very important for the audience to know. There's a driver-in bill coming in Nevada. If that bill is passed, signed into law, Zoox is shut down. So the timing is very, very interesting here.
Let's move on to the Tesla earnings. So on Wednesday, that's when they printed. We don't really need to go through all the numbers. This is not going to be the earnings review. And if you want that, there's plenty of large banks that can provide that for you. As expected, the auto revenue was down, but they expect auto revenue to be return to growth in 25. And I'm curious whether, we talked about this on past episodes. Is it possible that, as it becomes more evident that FSD can save your life, that, people are going to want to try and buy these cars, and that's going to contribute to growth?
Yes. I don't necessarily think it's the safety element that's going to drive it. I think it's the convenience factor that's going to drive it. And then to some degree, FOMA is going to kick in. Don't discount car lines, carpooling. And don't discount that factor. Mom's in a car line pool, dad's in a car line pool. How'd you get it? Well, FSD got me here. Oh, wow, this is not stressful. Yeah, the kids in the back playing video games. It's great. There's going to be some element to that, but I do believe over the term as we're in 25 and we go into 26, that FSD will be a catalyst to drive Tesla sales, and you will start to see a buyer emerge that doesn't necessarily care about the interior of the Tesla, the technology, the Tesla outside of FSD. All they want is FSD, and that will become a sales driver going forward. And I believe that Tesla will start to eat away market share at other companies that do not have as advanced technology.
There's another aspect where I think there was some mention of, if you're subscribing to FSD, do you get a free hardware 3 upgrade? I don't know if that's like the outright purchase or the monthly subscriptions, but maybe that layers on some incremental revenue as well, because it incents people to get the hardware upgrades that are necessary. Because when he was asked about hardware 3, I think someone on the call was like, oh yeah, we can do it. And Elon's like, yeah, not so much. Because some of the components probably need to be upgraded.
The cameras need to be upgraded. The hardware needs to be upgraded. Reading some of the follow-up commentary, and we do not have actual statements from Tesla on this, but reading the follow-up commentary, I believe that if you pay the $7,500 for the full edition, that Tesla will upgrade you. But if you're paying for the monthly subscription, they will not upgrade you complimentary. That's the way I'm reading it today. We're still waiting for a firm statement from Tesla confirming or denying the path that they are going to go forward.
The bigger part, or the biggest part perhaps, of the earnings call was providing a more specific timeline of when we'd have unsupervised full self-driving in Austin. They talked about Elon, and they talked about it when they had the big show in LA, Austin and California in 2025. Now you put a timeline of June, which is very close. I think was it, I don't know if whether they said it was going to be a paid service or not a paid service, but let's just say it is a paid service in June. Grayson, what is your over-under that June happens?
I said this on a previous podcast episode. It'll happen before the end of the year, but I still believe it's going to be in a semi-controlled environment between the Austin Bergam Airport and Gigafactory. I do not see it at this time going to downtown Austin. So I will say by the Austin Bergam Airport, Giga Texas, yes. Downtown Austin by June, I don't see that.
Okay.
I don't see that.
I love it. And you're staying consistent. I don't think it's going to happen in June. But look, and by the way, I just think in general, Tesla they recognize the fact that if there's a tragic accident, it's going to set them back and the industry. Not that they care necessarily about the industry. I think they do, but even themselves back. And they acknowledge that on the call. So I think, there is a safety culture there that people don't necessarily give them credit for. So, but the progress has been fast on 13. And so I think if things go well in June, I'm going to say by the end of the year in Austin, outside of this, this controlled environment that you're talking about, that you're going to have a unsupervised paid service, self-driving service by the end of 2025. That's new for me. That's aggressive.
Okay, that's very new for you. It's aggressive. It was interesting. One of the analysts on the call, the earnings call, asked Mr. Musk if he could drive down to Austin and take a ride, and Mr. Musk dodged the question. But in the follow-up, I'm going to quote this because this was interesting for Mr. Musk said. I'm going to quote this here. But I'm very confident we'll have released unsupervised full self-driving, fully autonomous Teslas in Austin and several other cities in America by the end of this year, as probably everywhere in America next year, at everywhere in North America at least. I think in terms of next year, our constraints is likely to just be regulatory. Yes, there will be regulatory constraints, but the tech still has challenges, as we spoke about on this podcast several times. Coming off of my street, that blind left turn, is it better with 13.2.5? Yes. Is it 100% working every time? No. So there still is challenges and edge cases that they are going to have to overcome before they can truly safely scale Cybercab.
Right. So we'll take the over on nationwide in 2026. However, I think, there is an opportunity, if the rate of progress continues, to achieve more markets in 2025, perhaps somewhat limited in scale, which I think would be a huge positive. Let's also just kind of note one thing. One of the big things that roiled the markets this week was DeepSeek, in part because it was just kind of this realization or kind of a reminder to people how quickly technology can change. And I know there's a lot of debates out there that you can have. If you want to reach out to us on Lightshed, we interviewed Perplexity this week. It's now available on replay, where we talked about kind of their model, how they're using DeepSeek in their model, but how DeepSeek kind of changes perhaps the pace and adds some more competition. Competition is good for innovation. And if you're getting compute to be more efficient and do faster things, that's only going to accelerate the innovation that others can benefit from, especially when it's something that's open source. I think a lot of times, we lose sight of that. And then to your point, even if things accelerate, you still have a regulatory process to get through. But hopefully, as we enter 2026 and the DOT kind of kicks in and, we've got some momentum, a lot of those regulatory things will at least be calm enough to be able to be in many more markets for Tesla in 2026.
Here's a question. I have a viewer question coming to you that you don't know is coming to you.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, it's good. Why are you not an analyst on the Tesla earnings calls? Because they won't, this particular analyst who's got LiDAR fever asked the same question quarter over quarter, and not one analyst, not one mention of the word DeepSeek, where I know you're a great analyst. You would ask Mr. Musk, what's the impact of DeepSeek? Not one question, but yet LiDAR.
I would have asked even things like, are they going to have remote drivers like every other kind of autonomous thing? They talked about, around the world, and everyone's like, oh, Tesla's not going to need them. Like, well, they're actually required in China in terms of having a certain amount of remote drivers available. Talk about fleet management. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be discussed. This is a frustration that exists for us on a lot of calls. But sometimes analysts that ask challenging questions, they don't want to necessarily have challenging questions in their calls. So a lot of times management teams curtail them as such.
Why? If you're a publicly traded company, you have to stand for scrutiny of the investor and the scrutiny of the SEC. Why can't you answer a hard question?
Not all companies are like that, but some people just don't like to be asked hard questions. But I will say this, one analyst from Morgan Stanley I saw was getting kind of lambasted by the Tesla Twitter mobs. And I think you have to kind of understand that he is trying to reflect the concerns of investors. And you could argue that in some case, investors are, emotionally against Elon and what he stands for on a number of different topics, or what he says, or how active he is on Twitter. And you would hope that in most cases that doesn't impact your investment decisions. But I think in some cases that it does. Elon undoubtedly is a polarizing figure. There are just a lot of people that may or may not be short Tesla, or that are long Google or things that benefit from LiDAR, that just fundamentally believe that he will not be able to achieve this without LiDAR. So it's a question that persists out there. So to have him come out and say certain things is necessary for the financial markets to function. It's a question that you want to get him on the record once again saying, no, we're still happy with this process with LiDAR. So he's doing his job with what investors are looking for. So if you want to criticize people that run billions of dollars, fine. But those are the ones that are funding or not funding, the other projects that exist in this space. So it's an important part of I think how the capital markets work. So, we'll see how things go forward with LiDAR.
But where does the LiDAR narrative come from? Because it seems to be a wave. It peaks up, it peaks down, it peaks up, it peaks down. Who's driving this narrative?
Well, there is a company that is offering paid self-driving rides in the market today in San Francisco. I don't think Tesla is doing that. So the current leader is using LiDAR. So I'm probably quite certain that if you asked many people within Waymo if they thought LiDAR was necessary, and being competitive that they'd be like, yeah, of course you need LiDAR. Anyone that doesn't use LiDAR is never going to figure this out. Notwithstanding the study that was released at the end of 2024, and that they could go down that. You and I both agreed that that's a possibility. I've been on the record many, many times saying I've heard these complaints about Starlink historically, and they've achieved things that others said that weren't done. But the fact remains, Waymo's there, and they're using LiDAR. So that gives them some level of credibility in the market.
I'm very bullish on Waymo. They're number one on the road to autonomy leaderboard. They've been that since the beginning of that board. But from an investment standpoint, you can invest in Waymo in the private market if you have capital. You can buy Alphabet stock, but you can't buy shares in Honeycomb. That LiDAR company is not public. It's part of the asset. So you get some investors go this theory that they're trying to buy these pure play LiDAR companies. I'll go on the record and say in 5 years, there'll be less than 2 or 3, maybe even less than that, publicly traded LiDAR companies, because the LiDAR...
I hear what you're saying. It's not a matter of a LiDAR company with a 200 million market cap, right? It's someone that cares about potentially shorting Tesla, being long Google, what the impact is to Uber and Lyft. There are obviously implications on whether if you believed that without LiDAR, that Tesla can't get there, and you're seeing Uber or Lyft trade off because of, that they're going to get there in June, then you're going to be confident of buying Uber and Lyft on any of these sell-offs as a result. So I think it's, and like, these are smart people. Like, it's not like random people saying that LiDAR is needed. So you can rip into an analyst for asking the question on a call, but are you going to rip into the engineer at Waymo that's done more in his life technology than any of you have? Or are you going to rip into, like in the Bigelow battle, where you had the battle between whether, the full end-to-end system versus not? Like, those are very smart people that have been in this industry for years. So are they idiots too, as you sit behind your computer with no technical expertise? I mean, give me a fucking break.
Yes, but Cramer's bullish on Uber, and there's an inverse ETF for that.
Yeah, there's plenty of ETFs if you want to trade Cramer. I wish I could do an ETF on some stuff that I see on Twitter.
That's true, because to me, I'm not I'm not anti LiDAR. I think LiDAR has a key role. I think there's two different paths.
I don't know. Right. And neither of us know. But again, there's smart people on both sides. I kind of come out slightly in the biased favor that camera only is going to happen based on, various discussions that I'm going to have. So I'm kind of in that camp, but I'm not religious about it because, again, there are much smarter people than me that have more experience that have explained to me all the reasons why that won't happen or it will take a very long, extended period of time. So we'll just have to see how it goes.
You're right. It's a religion. You have the pro LiDAR, the anti LiDAR. There's plenty of room in the market for both approaches.
Well, it's just funny. Look, I just ranted about people who have little expertise, but yammer on. I'm the same thing. I have little expertise. My difference is I'm not digging in my heels and saying it has to be LiDAR or there's no chance it is LiDAR or you don't have to have LiDAR. And anyone that comes at that topic, that's not literally in the space with such certainty should be questioned. And you should question everything else that they're saying about that topic, in my opinion.
Bravo, Walt. Bravo, Walt. We call it Walt's Rant Corner. We went from Telco Corner to Walt's Rant Corner.
You had your rant a couple episodes ago, so that was my opportunity to go on.
Walt, you had your rant. It was good. I don't have to put you in the corner. I'm going to bring you front and center because now we're going to go into another interesting Tesla element. On the call, Elon's out there talking about the Airbnb-like model. That was interesting, but I put on my regulatory hat with all my stuff that my friend Sergey from Coop tells me. How the heck are we going to ensure this? How is that model going to work? Any laws have to change? Or will anybody even want to share their car if they're not using it?
I mean, sometimes it takes a tremendous amount of focus when you're listening to when Elon talks on these earnings calls, because they kind of go a lot of different directions and the pace of his discussion is challenging, I guess, sometimes. I'm pretty sure specifically said they're already talking to people about licensing FSD. Okay, so let's check that box. But then in the course of that conversation, he's like, but if we're going to do that, it has to be something of massive scale. Okay, so I assume large OEMs. And then as he continued along, I think what he said was but we first have to go nationwide and is presumably get their nationwide fleet and scale up their cars accordingly before we would do that deal. So look, that probably is the end game. Talk about CapEx light, man. You get, I think it's again, I think we've talked about this before. It reminds me of the cable plan on telco. Drive the industry into the dirt with competition, and then you effectively buy them. In this case, you're not buying them, but you're probably saving them. They're going to drive these other OEMs into the dirt. This is in their view, with having better cars, FSD, electric, better batteries. And then when they're on their backs and they're like, oh my God, how do I save myself? He's like, how about you license my FSD and, use your ability to manufacture with scale or whatever it is. And maybe that's the game plan. So I think when I look through it all, I don't, who knows? Things can change by the minute. If someone comes in with a sweetheart deal and says, we're going to give you licensing, but I don't, it's not like it's a company that really needs that free cash flow right now. A lot of times when someone goes to licensing, it's because they can't raise the capital to do the capital intensity of doing the fleet. I don't think that's going to be Tesla's challenge. So they don't really need to do it. So you might as well develop your own business model before you go that route. What do you think?
I think at some point they will license it. I could see a scenario where 10%, 15%, even 20% of the global market for autonomy's licensing is running on Tesla. If they do start to achieve double-digit market share from licensing, how does Wall Street react?
It would be huge, right? Because when you go to, there are those that believe in the multi-trillion-dollar markets of Optimus and just mop up all the share you're going to have. So I get it. So maybe for those people it's going to be negative, but for a broader investor base, you're like, holy cow, we just de-risked, trusting that Elon can ramp volume and fund all this by basically saying, now we're just going to get this free cash flow stream, which we can put a massive multiple on with an OEM that's going to be willing to take it, bring in a third party. Look, the offshoot here is if they did something like that, presumably this fragments the market, right? If there's another source of full self-driving cars that someone else is going to own, that's going to be good for Uber and Lyft because someone else potentially is going to have a fleet in there. And then if you have a fragmented fleet, they're more likely to plug into these platforms. So I think Wall Street would like it for Tesla, would like it for Uber. Maybe some of the Super Bowls of Tesla won't like it because it does kind of open that door up and kind of give Uber and Lyft some incremental life.
What if in the terms of service of the licensing agreement, those vehicles, if they were ever to be put on a network, could only be put on the Tesla network? What impact would that have?
I mean, that's just negotiating, and I guess if they're in a strong enough position, it's possible that could occur. Sure, then that would obviously be bad for Uber and Lyft, right?
That just makes the Tesla network that much more powerful because what Tesla can do, even without licensing, when they build this network, Uber's biggest Achilles heel, and there's multiple reports on this, is the inconsistency of the product. We all experience it every day. Tesla would get rid of that inconsistency of the product issue, and that would be changing.
I hear you. It's just a matter of what I listen to. And again, what you listen to and what happens for any CEO ends up being always two different things. But from what I heard is, yeah, of course, people want to license us, but we got to get our house in order first over the next 2 years, meaning that get to many, many more markets where there have autonomy.
Looking at markets with autonomy, on the call, Elon confirmed FSD's coming to semi. The Reno factory is coming online shortly. Could that be another potential licensing play if they can? I almost say if they can, when they prove FSD could work on semi. I was talking to a CEO of a very large trucking company today, and I was very shocked. And I said, "What are you looking at? Are you looking at L4, which is full autonomy, or are you looking at things?" He goes, "No, all the fleets want a driver assistance system now. Out of the box, FSD today is a driver assistance system. That's what the fleets want." That gets interesting.
Yes, I think there's a lot of companies in this space that have been developing relationships with companies that make these trucks, right? So obviously, Tesla could make their own truck and be a fifth major competitor in that world, right? So that's certainly a possibility. Different market, I think, in terms of how those products are purchased and, how that distribution channel works. Also different, I think, from what I've learned in what's important for autonomy on a massive, whatever the weight is, multi-ton truck coming down a highway and the types of things that you need there. So, look, there's a lot of things for Elon to do, not only at Tesla, but at SpaceX, with the government, with AI. Not sure this is the top of the priority, but obviously don't discount it. There's a lot of things even within SpaceX, within the Starlink that hadn't been at the top, what you wouldn't think are at the top of the priority list, but then all of a sudden Starlink ticks them off and it impacts the handful of companies that are in that industry. So, those companies should stay frosty, as they say, because, Elon's in the space.
If you take a company, very conservative company, PACCAR, Bellevue, Washington, very conservative, extremely far behind on autonomous trucking, extremely far behind. Could they potentially look to catch up to Daimler or to Volvo by making a deal just because they're competitive, that they don't really have a path forward just because how far behind they are?
I mean, all these things are all possible. I think, again, it's a fragmented market opportunity. I think there is a race in terms of these companies. As we know, Aurora is looking to go driver out this year. We've talked about other companies as well. Kodiak has I think hit a milestone of actually selling trucks today. They're in the market today selling trucks, right? I mean, what was the milestone that they hit, Grayson?
They were the first company in history to ever sell an autonomous truck to a third party that is going to own the asset and operate it. All they're collecting is a service fee. It's brilliant. And that company was Atlas Energy, and they're operating in the Permian Basin.
I mean, that stuff matters, right? To be in the market with a product today that you've sold. Don Burnett's the CEO. I met him. Super smart guy. I think aggressive personality, can push that ball forward. So, again, competition is good. You want good competitors in the market, but I think we just have to watch to see how that market plays out.
If Kodiak scales it in the Permian Basin, which is huge, to hundreds of trucks thousands of trucks, then perhaps goes into North Dakota or into other environments similar to that where they're not owning the asset. Does that just start to create some sort of buzz or shift in the industry where you could see other companies following that, since they do not have to have that come up, raise all that capital, have that asset on their balance sheet? They're basically getting a service revenue.
I mean, it should. There's a lot of different ways that the model could evolve. This seems like a very smart one. It doesn't preclude other versions working. And just because this is working now, if someone's about to go drive around and they've got a different business model now or later this year, it's not like they have to flip-flop immediately and replicate, kind of how Kodiak's doing it. I mean, but let's just focus on the positive for Kodiak. I mean, this is obviously a pretty big milestone for them.
It's a huge milestone. And to the audience, in 2 weeks, we had the chief product officer of Volvo Autonomous Solutions will be on, and he'll be discussing Volvo's approach to transport as a service, where Volvo is going to own the asset, license the driver from Aurora. So there's a lot of models that are emerging. We don't really have a clear set way, but over the coming years, hopefully a genuine model or an overarching model emerges at some point.
And did you get into some of these topics that we just hit on? When does that podcast drop?
We did. 2 weeks. Next week, we got a very special one. We have a guest who I'll surprise everybody, but we did a deep dive on DeepSeek and the impact on autonomous driving that's going to come next Tuesday, and this will come the following Tuesday.
Really? Then when is that one dropping, the DeepSeek one?
Tuesday. You inspire me.
Yeah, we have to hit those DeepSeek topics quick before this thing quickly fades into the background. Or
you called me up and you asked me to ask around, and I booked a guest and we did it. So thank you for the recommendation.
Love it. Speaking of DeepSeek and AI and staying on with the Tesla earnings, they did announce the Cortex training cluster for FSD at Giga Texas. And I believe there's 100,000 NVIDIA H100s in there, and that's launched.
It's going to accelerate the training of FSD. I can't wait to see the results that come out of that 6 months from now, 12 months from now, while the H100s and the H200s running. It'd be fascinating if Tesla releases some sort of data to go push back on the market narrative of how the GPU compute power doesn't make a difference, because I do truly believe when you're training these large models that it does.
Yeah, it was a shame that no one asked about that. It would have been good to get Elon's thoughts on compute. But again, if you want to, just a second advertisement, if you want to hear what Perplexity has to say about where compute needs to be on the phone, in the network, on the edge, hit us up at Lightshed and check out that replay. Enough of Tesla and enough of Elon already. Let's move on to the industry leader in autonomy, Waymo, who had their own announcements. And the big one, well, not the huge one, but a major step is going to Freeways and having employees drive in unsupervised, I believe, Waymos in LA. I guess, to me, this is going to be a big unlock for them once they go commercial with it. I guess my question to you, Grayson, is it going to be like sequential, meaning like, okay, San Francisco is going to happen before LA because they had employees on Freeways in San Francisco? Or is there an overall learning that you think is happening within autonomy that everything, is going to get unlocked, meaning Freeways open for, paying customers in a lot of markets at once or in quick succession?
Freeways will be unlocked in a quick succession of markets. Waymo has clearly cracked it. It's just a matter of what markets do they bring online and perfect first. And if you look at it just from a pure geographic standpoint, having lived there half my life in the LA area, if you're not going to operate on highways in the LA area, the service is not as good as it could be. And I'd be very detrimental to use it because I don't want to add on 30, 40, 50 minutes. Meanwhile, I never traveled very far and lived there because I lived in my area and all the traffic is horrendous. But if an individual wants to go from Santa Monica to downtown to go to a Lakers game or go to a Kings game, you got to go on the Santa Monica freeway. Or if you want to go from Midtown to the beach, you got to go on the freeway. LA is the perfect market to truly unlock freeways in the United States for Waymo based on the currently publicly available markets.
And as our San Francisco tech friends would say, it gives good signal that things are going well elsewhere, meaning that if things weren't going well with the sensors that they were using or the technology that they were using at 50 miles an hour in San Francisco, they wouldn't even bother to move on, I don't think, to LA. So I think it's a good sign. Meanwhile, in terms of, are they activating enough cars. We talked a couple episodes ago about the huge parking lot of Jags that were waiting to get outfitted, with the electronics. Apparently, it's not a massive problem because they launched Atlanta again for employees, but they have enough cars to start the Atlanta process. So things are continuing to move on steadily at Waymo. Good management there, yes?
Extremely. Waymo's the best managed company in the autonomous vehicle industry today, without a doubt. Extremely well managed, extremely disciplined. They are the clear market leader. Atlanta, to give you a little color here, Waymo announced it today on X, 30 square mile ODD. What Waymo did not offer clarity on, which Waymo, I know you listen, so if you want to write to Walton, I would love to know, will you go on the freeway? Will you go into Buckhead from downtown Atlanta? Will you use the freeway? And when are you going to get to Hartsfield Jackson, the airport? Those are the two big defining factors for the Atlanta market. I think we'd love to see you either come on the pod and talk about it or publicly release some data on it. But a very big step forward. And Walt, the other big key in this is exclusively on Uber, not in the Waymo app.
Well, you have to try different models elsewhere. So maybe that's a positive for Uber. The stock certainly didn't reflect that when it was announced. But you got to try the different models. Maybe that means that there's less cars that they are required before they hit the Waymo. So then I guess the question is like, okay, a year or two from now when they have enough cars, they flip over to Waymo. My answer to that is probably not. You'd rather just add more cars to other markets. Maybe they limit the amount of cars in Atlanta, deal with what does an Uber Waymo market look like, and then go to the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh market, and then that's where you send your volumes of Waymo cars. Or send those incremental cars to LA and San Francisco and open up the freeways there first. So if anything in Atlanta, you don't even need to test for freeways because just leave that for the Uber drivers for the time being.
Do you feel that Waymo will use Atlanta as a test market for an adoption rate and getting the data from Uber if they're sharing it, and the individuals that opted for a human driver versus an autonomous vehicle determine their path forward if it has a higher uptake than a human driver?
Sure. I think, you should always test your assumptions and we'll see what that model looks like. And if they need to go less capital intensive in the future, at least they can put together data and say, well, in Atlanta, this is how it worked. And in LA, this is how it worked. And you can make strategic decisions from there. What is this 10 markets thing though, where they're doing road trips? This is, that was the other news that they had. And how important is that?
It's huge. Let's go back in the way back machine. Years and years ago, Alan Owensman from Forbes actually broke the story. Waymo announces LA as a road trip market. Lo and behold, years later, LA is a commercial market.
What's a road trip market?
They quote unquote go explore the market to learn how to drive in the city. They're trying to get driving behavior. The next step after a road trip becomes mapping. Then they begin mapping. And then they begin testing.
What is the typical pace of that road trip to mapping to testing to?
Historically, it's been a year to 2 years. That's historic. And then sometimes there's been gaps in between. Historically, it's been a year to 2 years. And some of the cities that they have tested in, Kirkland, Washington, for example, just before they call it road trips, they went testing. Buffalo, New York, they do a lot of winter testing there. Naples, Florida, they've done testing there. Didn't announce them as road trips, announced them as testing. Testing, I believe, from a road trip perspective, I would estimate 6 to 12 months going forward if they do pick that city. But it's very important to point out that a road trip does not guarantee an expansion. Very key to point that out there.
When has a road trip not led to an expansion?
Kirkland, well, this is before they called it road trip. This is when Mr. Krafchick was CEO. Kirkland, Washington, Buffalo, New York, which they currently still test, has not led to it. But they are very careful not to call it a road trip. It could just be a branding, but I've picked up on that little nuance there. When they call it a road trip, it has a higher tendency to actually become a city in the future.
Look, that's the past. The bottom line is they're spreading. And this is from their own announcements, 10 markets. Like, this is not a company. This is not like a startup company trying to make things work in LA and San Francisco. And then we'll see what, if we get more allocation. All indications are a well-organized company putting in place the steps to get to national scale.
100%.
So you got to, you have to, so this was, if it's 10 this year, who knows how many convert, maybe it's going to be 20 or 30 quote unquote road trip markets next year. if you're Tesla, you approach this very differently, right? There's no road trip market. It either works or it doesn't work. You either flip it on or not flip it on. So that's a difference. So while we, certainly want to pat Waymo on the back, the reality is, there could be a step function competition if and when Tesla, what I would say, breaks the code or fixes it and figures out. And then I think their pace of expansion could be a lot more rapid. Maybe not manufacturing cars as fast, but I think that's something Waymo needs to address. Both of them, like, Tesla has to do it internally, and Waymo needs to find probably additional partners and, additional integrations beyond Hyundai that can scale things up. But look, man, like, just more evidence that it's coming together in terms of scale opportunities for autonomy in 25 and 26.
The scale's coming. You're right about Tesla. When they crack it, they push an over-the-air update and turn on the vehicles. Waymo's doing it. That's called the Waymo way. The two cities they announced, San Diego, great military city, really great city, really great food, by the way. And then Las Vegas. They're going into Zoox's territory. So I've been thinking a lot about this, and I'm going to put you on the spot here. We're going to have Walt Prediction Corner. If Waymo launches commercial service in Las Vegas before Zoox, what message does that send to the market?
Well, first, let me just say, one of the best burritos I've ever had was in San Diego, across from that little amusement park that they have on the beach. Incredible. You're right. Great food in San Diego. In terms of Zoox, I think the hand at the till here might be steadier than you think. And just because they get quote unquote beat in Las Vegas doesn't mean there's intent for Zoox to stick this out, not partner with Uber and Lyft, and try and get the technology to a point, where they can have their own autonomous network. Obviously, it's going to be a bit of a black eye in terms of, hey, you picked a market and someone beat you there. But they were beaten effectively in their home market, right? We see Zoox kind of only around in a very limited area in San Francisco at the moment. So again, whatever, black eye, hand at the till, strong. Bigger question is going to be, if Zoox expands in San Francisco, even with a handful of cars or vehicles, I guess you would call them, toaster ovens, that's going to be the bigger news, right? Zoox expands throughout all of San Francisco. And by the way, again, I don't think Zoox has any plans on partnering with Uber or Lyft. So that's yet another headline issue for Uber and Lyft, yet another positive for the autonomy industry, which benefits all of these companies, and I think gives Amazon some increased credibility about the dollars that they're sticking behind this. Now, you may think they never get there. So we'll see. So for our Zoox guys out there and women, listeners, you can really stick it to Grayson by getting that product throughout San Francisco. And I will be here to salt him if and when that happens as your advocate.
I'm going to have to call you Salty Walt. I want to be very clear. I want Zoox to succeed. I just do not feel that they have any sense of the culture that we're currently in or how to scale and operate and message this. Their messaging does not resonate to where we are as a society.
Well, look, the messaging, and you're referring to this commercial that we saw on Twitter that reminds me a lot of the Jaguar commercial. It's odd, whatever. It's techie, PR firms. I don't know what they're thinking of, but that's not what matters, Grayson. What matters is getting the technology to work, increasing some scale, and increasing your footprint in San Francisco. And no matter what a commercial looks like, that's not gonna mean anything. It's gonna be seeing that toaster oven, to go all the way up to the Presidio and maybe even down to the airport. What if, I'm gonna put it back to you, what if Zoox, and if it's only a point-to-point situation from Market Street to San Francisco Airport, they cut a deal with the city to get a drop-off, and what if they get there before Waymo does? Drop-offs to the airports.
I would cheer them loudly, and I talk about it here and on the road to autonomy under one condition.
Yes.
Offer non-shared rides.
I'm sure it's not like the vehicle is not going to go unless they pick up a second one. I mean, Uber attempted the Uber shared rides. I think I did one of them when I was at a conference. You can ask for an Uber shared ride, and if you don't get it, you just get a cheaper version of, and you're alone in the car. Oh God, the shared rides, you and the shared rides. What do you have against get to know people, talk to new people, expand your horizons?
I talk to you. You expand my horizon. You teach me about telco and your love of the Eagles. I got to tell you, you went to the Super Bowl. You're going. I'm very impressed. Barkley, you were right to rest them the last game of the season. Your Eagles are looking good. The question is, do the refs behave in the Super Bowl?
Well, hopefully the Eagles put up enough points that won't matter, but we'll see.
Well, we all know who Walt's rooting for. I don't know who I'm rooting for, but I know I'm rooting for a good time because I'm hosting a party.
Hold on, Grayson. Let me just point out that a lot of people will tell me, "Oh yeah, I was rooting for the Eagles." You don't have to say that. We as Eagles fans know that you're not rooting for us, and we don't care. We just don't care. Like, you can hate on us and root against Eagles and the Eagle fans. It's fine. We get it. We don't care. It's not going to at all change whether we enjoy the fight to win this game.
I will summarize it this way. Eagles fans and Philadelphia sports fans, great sports fans, by the way, have a lot of pride. Have a lot of pride and a lot of passion. With that passion and that pride in mind, Walt, what do we need to look for in the autonomy markets over the coming week?
Well, who knows? Maybe Waymo is going to have 3 more announcements next week. But what's on my calendar is Wednesday, Uber reports. They'll have a conference call. I am sure autonomy questions are going to be dominating that earnings call. So we'll be here to talk about that next week while I'm on my road to New Orleans.
Walt's going on the road to New Orleans, and we're going to dive deep into the Uber earnings next week. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is scaling autonomy. Walt, until next week.